Hello and welcome back to our muscle lectures. In this video, we are going to talk about the contractile cycle. Okay, so I'm going to start by reminding you that when muscles contract, we have a shortening of our sarcomeres, and that happens because we are basically pulling the thin filaments and the thick filaments so that they have a greater overlap, okay? So far we've looked at the molecular events that kind of initiate muscle contraction. We've looked at how we get calcium to come out of the sarcoplasmic reticulum. We've talked about what that calcium does. It basically exposes the binding site on the actin for the myosin to bind to it. But we haven't yet covered the actual molecular events that allow this sliding to happen between the thick and thin filaments. So that is what we are going to talk about now, okay? So the set of molecular events that allows the thick and thin filaments to slide past each other is called the contractile cycle or the cross bridge cycle, okay? As you might guess from the name cycle, it is a repeating cycle of events, okay? So we are just going to start here in that cycle. In this state, which we call the rigor state, we have a myosin head bound very tightly to the actin molecule, to the thin filament, okay? What's going to happen from here is, oh, and I should mention that this is a very short-lived state in living muscle. Like you don't usually encounter muscle that's in the rigor state. Usually we have ATP around. So with ATP around, what'll happen is the ATP will bind to the myosin. That will allow the myosin head to detach from the actin filament, okay? After the ATP binds, the myosin head is going to hydrolyze the ATP, okay? So that is what's shown here in this panel. So the myosin hydrolyzes ATP, and as it does so, basically that energy that's released during that ATP hydrolysis allows the myosin to undergo a conformational change. So if you look at the myosin head in this figure, you can see that it's at this, like, I don't know, this acute angle like this, okay? After we hydrolyze ATP, that allows the myosin head to cock. So it enters this cocked position. And when it does so, that's going to allow the myosin head to bind to the actin here, okay? A couple things I want to say about this. This binding between the myosin and the actin in this panel is kind of a weak binding. It's not a strong binding like we saw up here in this invisible panel here in the rigor state, okay? So it's like a loose binding. And the reason that it's loose is that tropomyosin is in the way, okay? So tropomyosin is not shown in this figure, but it is there, partially blocking that binding site between the myosin and the actin, okay? Other thing I want to say is that you'll notice after we've hydrolyzed ATP, we are still holding on to ADP and inorganic phosphate, okay? All right, next thing that happens is kind of like the big event in this cycle. Oh, sorry. This state we refer to as the relaxed state. So this state where the myosin is weakly bound to the actin. We call that the relaxed state. That's the state that the muscle is in when it's at rest, when it's not contracting, okay? All right, now we're ready for our big event, which is going to be the entry of calcium and the power stroke, okay? So remember, we went over that series of events that's going to allow calcium to come into the cell. That calcium then is going to bind troponin, which is then going to move tropomyosin, which then is going to allow the myosin head to bind very tightly to the actin. So I guess there's not really a panel that shows that. But if you just kind of imagine this same picture, except with a strong bond with that invisible tryptomyosin out of the way, we're going to have that strong bond, okay? And then what's going to happen is the head is going to return to its original position, okay? So what happens as we do that, the myosin head is going to kind of grab onto the actin really strongly now that the tryptomyosin is out of the way, now that we've had that calcium come in, okay? It's going to grab on the actin and it's going to move the head, which is then going to result in the movement of the thin filament, the actin filament, okay? As it does that, we kick out our inorganic phosphate. Oh, I guess I didn't really mention this. So that movement of the myosin head where it moves and it moves the actin along with it is called the power stroke. All right, so once we've done that movement, what's gonna happen? Oh, what? Okay, anyway. What's going to happen is after we've done that movement, eventually, like once the power stroke has completed, we're going to release ADP, and then that's going to return us to the rigor state, which I can show you by backing up, right? So again, this is the rigor state. We've kicked out that ADP, and we are still holding on tightly to the actin molecule here. So we have that tight bond between the myosin and the actin. And then if there's ATP around, which there usually is, then that's going to allow us to go through the cycle again. Okay. Okay, couple things that I want to say about the contractile cycle. So this is your overview of the entire cycle. But I want to say, kind of focus here on the relaxed state here, okay? So one thing that I really want to point out, one thing that's very important to note is that you need ATP in order to relax your muscle. Remember that I said that this is the state that the muscle is in when it's relaxed? Well, I don't know if you noticed this, but you needed ATP to get to this state, okay? So that kind of explains, you know, actually, before I say that, I should say usually ATP is available, very readily available in muscle. So we're able to relax our muscle whenever we need to, okay? But sometimes we run out of ATP, right? So like if you are sprinting or something, you might run out of ATP in your muscle, and that is going to cause you to be stuck in this state, the rigor state. And that's basically like why you cramp up. Yeah, when you're running out of ATP. The other thing I want to say is when you die, you run out of ATP in your muscle tissue. And again, you get stuck in this state, in the rigor state. So your myosin and your actin are kind of stuck together like that, and there isn't any real room for movement. And that's what's responsible for rigor mortis, that kind of stiffness that happens after someone dies. Right. The other thing that I want to say is this is the state we're in when we are relaxed, and then we need that calcium signal to come in order for the power stroke to occur, in order to get those filaments to slide past each other. Okay, last thing I want to say is that we have this video for you to watch that shows an animation of the cross-bridge cycle, the contractile cycle. Yeah, I want you to watch it. It's a very nice depiction of the process.